Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Kira Sports Pulse. You are here with the Java Energy Hour. My name is Gabriel. There's a lot to get to with this Boston Celtics team, and I think it's a little more nuanced probably than what some are making it out to be. There's on one hand, and we've said this before here on the show. On the one hand, you can only beat who's in front of you. So you can't I think it's a little unfair to hold against them being the Boston Celtics. I think it's probably a little bit unfair to hold against them that Jimmy Butler wasn't there for a lot of it or for all of it. That I think it's unfair to hold against it that Donovan Mitchell and Tyrese Halliburton were there for a good chunk of the playoff run. So that's something that you can't hold against the Boston Celtics, in my opinion. That would be unfair. What isn't unfair and what is totally in bounds to evaluate, in my opinion, with this team is that they haven't answered, and they haven't come close to addressing a lot of the questions that we had about this team to begin with. I think that is 100% fair, and that is still true. So, but first, we're going to discuss that. We're going to discuss Derrick White and his role, and Jaylen Brown winning the Larry Bird Eastern Conference Finals MVP. And we are also going to discuss what are their actual chances, their actual potential prospects come the NBA playoffs itself. But first, the Indiana Pacers. Now, if you are part of the Indiana Pacers organization, or you just for whatever reason have a rooting interest either in the team itself or on one of the for one of the players specifically, whatever you may have, doesn't matter. I think you mostly feel good about how the season unfolded. For large critical sections, for large critical parts of the year, your best player, Tyrese Halliburton, did not play well. And despite that, they advanced to the Eastern Conference Finals. So it this is a team that I think is somewhat ahead of schedule. Now, were they fortunate that the Knicks were ended up being run into the ground, either through injury or through the lack of load management, player management, depending on what side of that debate you fall on? I think so. But again, it's the same, right? I'm gonna hold the same standard to this team as I hold every team. I can't hold that against the Indiana Pacers that they were fortunate by the misfortune of the New York Knicks, for example. That would be unfair. And overall, in terms of this Indiana Pacers team, I think there's a lot of positives to build from and to build off of. But still, it was something of a big question mark because you wonder how often can a team get back to this point where you're one of the four final teams remaining. It's so hard to win come the playoffs. It's so hard to win enough in the regular season where you position yourself to even be able to get this far, to make it this far. So largely, I would say if we take this season in a vacuum, that the Indiana Pacers look good. They look ahead of schedule. But I think it's totally fair. I think it's totally inbounds to question whether they can repeat this performance for next year. I think if you're skeptical, if they can, that's more than valid. So we will see. This is and I like overall the core around them in terms of Tyrese Halliburton, Miles Turner, Then we've seen some other players emerge this year. And I've always liked TJ McConnell. Um, whether he eventually somehow moves into the starting role or is that consistent off the bench spark, I'm okay with either. Either way, TJ McConnell is someone that you like to have on your team, and he's someone where you need a player like him on your team. You need a player like TJ McConnell on your team, regardless of whether you're an annual contender, regardless of anything else. So, but that being said, I wonder because we've seen it where teams have fought, they climb, they they look like they're finally ready to take that next step, only for us to then later look back and say, ah, this is a team that missed out on their chance. This is a team that missed out on their opportunity when they had it. And so that's what I'm a little more afraid of with this Indiana Pacers team specifically. And again, they have Naismith, they have Nembhard, Shepard. They all look good. Who knows what's going to happen with Toppin and in free agency? Great young core. And despite being undermanned, I mean, let's be real. The ball bounces a couple different ways. This is a tied series after 4, or Indiana could very easily even be in the lead after 4 games against a good Boston team. So the sky isn't falling. I think there's a lot of room for hope and optimism. But just overall, I think that there is room for having a feeling of especially this year in this East with how everything kind of panned out. I think there's more than plenty of room for this was the year, this was the chance, and we'll see. The other teams are going to rebound. The other teams are going to look to make that next push, that next effort. I mean, speaking of which, I don't think anyone sees the Miami Heat having as bad of injury luck as what they did this year. And if they do, they would be able to better navigate it. What about the Cleveland Cavaliers? Depending on what happens with Donovan Mitchell, there are conflicting reports out there at the moment. But depending on what happens with Donovan Mitchell, this could be a team that's ahead of the Indiana Pacers as of right now. The New York Knicks are, and regardless of how I personally feel, again, I'll admit that I right now have an anti Boston Celtics slant and bias, but it's ingrained in what I've seen on the court and what history has showed me about the players involved on this team and this nucleus as a whole. So even though I'm not as high on the Boston Celtics as some people are, I would still pick them over the Indiana Pacers going into next year. And so that's why I say, because of how everything shaped up this year in the playoffs, I wonder if the Indiana Pacers and their fans are going to end up saying, dang it, this was our best chance to actually make some noise. But we will have to see. Time will tell. Moving on to Jaylen Brown. So he wins the uh Larry Bird Eastern Conference Finals MVP. And I largely agree with that actually. So if you say that it's ridiculous or that he didn't deserve it, fine. But and this is one of my pet peeves for any awards, for any all-star team recognition, or for any first team, second team, third team, all pro, whatever the sport is, you get the idea. If you say someone didn't deserve to be in, or if you say someone would be snubbed, then who are you replacing? What switch are you making so that in your head, in your mind, it's justified who or that the actual recognition goes to someone who deserves it. What are you doing, or what is the switch that you're making there? And so in the case of Jaylen Brown, I'm largely okay with it because, as I've said multiple times before, he's been really good. He's put the team in a position to win largely through the first 3.5 quarters. And then at the end of games is where you have the question marks. But even last night, we saw the first signs of maybe he's starting to turn the page in terms of crunch time. I love how he was the primary ball handler on what ended up being that game-winning shot. For sure, I trust with Jaylen Brown when we're comparing end of game scenarios between him and Jason Tatum. I was never worried about Jaylen Brown's mindset or his attack mentality. That was never a concern of mine. Instead, it was more that he was too reckless and that he was too willing to take an inadvisable shot. So again, yesterday, this series, are we starting to see him turn the page or turn the corner? I guess it works either way, turn the page, turn the corner. On what was up to this point a fair criticism of his? Possibly. Very possible. So, and then back to the point. If he's not the Eastern Conference Final MVP, who is it? I don't know who else I would have. I truly don't know who else I would have put in there at this point because it, for sure, the same argument holds with Jason Tatum. I mean, in terms of they've been great for throughout the playoffs, especially stats wise. But when the game counts the most, we see Jason Tatum taking fadeaway jump shots over smaller players than him from 15 plus feet out. Taking really dumb, inadvisable shots down the stretch when it counts the most. And now truthfully, hand to heart, genuinely, if they had given it to Drew Holiday, I would have been more than okay with it. Now, I know he doesn't have the stats, but his impact during the most critical moments, especially when it looked like this could have been a series, that to me, pardon me, whew, that to me is what makes you an MVP level player. So now I hear the other argument in terms of, well, he doesn't have the stats, or the other they carry the team. They being Tatum and Brown are carrying the team during the most critical points. I mean, sure, yeah, that's fair. But that's and now it's a two-edged thing. That's a byproduct of them getting the most touches. And it's because of how good they are and how talented they are that the team trusts them. But if, and now this is me projecting a little bit, but if Drew Holiday or Derrick White were to get about half of the looks more than what they are currently getting, I think they would put up similar numbers, or I don't think the stats argument would hold up nearly as well. So this is why, for me, this is more, you have to put some stock in the stats, obviously, but also the eye test and how the game unfolds. And again, who is best when it counts the most in those critical moments of the game. That's to me what's most important. And for that reason, I would have been okay with Drew Holiday. And now, laugh at me if you want on this, but and we have a little disagreement here on some of the guests who have come on here. Al Horford for a minute, definitely not in game 4, but throughout the playoff series, he has been a matchup nightmare. And he has been someone that has played well when others weren't. So, not saying that he should have been the MVP, Eastern Conference Finals MVP. Not saying that at all. But right, he's someone where you could have looked and where you say, okay, he's kind of doing his thing. He's kind of doing what's asked of him. He's doing what's needed within his role. He's maximizing his abilities out there for this team. So again, not at all saying that it should have been Al Horford. All I'm saying with that comment is that he is someone who is playing his role well and was we're just saying most valuable player, most valuable. He is certainly adding the most value, and at times I think they would have lost a couple games. They would have lost a couple of games, particularly against the Cavs and early against the Pacers, where he was the one that was playing the best. And Tatum and Brown were kind of asleep at the wheel. But again, he wouldn't have been deserving of the Finals MVP. Not saying that at all. Uh, would Derrick White have been? No. But I'm seeing his name trending on Twitter right now at the moment. And I think he's someone that deserves recognition. He is someone, too, who is doing everything in his power to make plays. He knows his role and really just getting it done on both ends. I mean, finishes last night with 5 steals and 3 blocks and chipping in 16 points. Don't love that he was 2 of 9 from 3. Don't love that. But either way, the point stands. He's someone who is doing what's needed. He is continuing to really play within the system and then finding moments to have a greater impact or to make great plays. Let's see. We have a comment. This is awesome from Well Intentioned too, and he's giving me a promotional offer. Thank you. Hell yeah, we will look into that. Talk to you after this, my friend. Thank you, Well Intentioned too. But either way, the point still stands with Derrick White that he's someone who is kind of what you want a perfect fit on any team. So he is when I said earlier that you need someone like a TJ McConnell, this is the mold of someone who, for example, I was speaking on. Oh, obviously, I'm not comparing TJ McConnell to Derek White. Not saying that at all. But I hope you can see past the direct apples to apples comparison and understand what I'm actually saying here is you need someone who is always going to give it to you every day. Hustle is never the question, but is willing to play within whatever role is needed on any given night. And so sometimes do they ask him to go off and score? Yes. Do they ask him some nights to just focus a little more on the defensive end? Yep. And some nights is it, hey, hope you get comfortable in the corner because Jason Tatum or Tyrese Halliburton, they're hot and you're not going to see as many shots tonight. And they're more than willing to take on that role regardless. So that's all I mean by that. But now, final point for today, the actual NBA finals chances for this team. I don't know necessarily if we can pick this game right now or this series. And so to anyone listening, you're probably saying, yeah, no kidding. This is the Timberwolves stand a chance. We're gonna assume that the Timberwolves find a way to not win. I think that's a safe bet. We are going to go ahead and assume that more likely than not that they are going to be swept. And at best, it's going to go to a 5-game series. But either way, if you're pinning your hopes on an epic comeback from this Timberwolves team, again, barring an injury tonight, barring an injury tonight. Um, I think other than that, it's more or less safe to say that we're going to see the Dallas Mavericks and the Boston Celtics play. So, what are the main concerns that I still have about this Boston team that I had really since before the playoffs started is they haven't been tested enough against good teams, and they really didn't get that chance. So some are saying that they've had the easiest path to the NBA finals. I don't know. If we go through history, there have been some easy paths and easier paths, I mean. But either way, you have to give credit where credit's due. They advanced. They made it to the NBA finals. No one you can't take that away from them. And again, it's not their fault that Jimmy Butler, Donovan Mitchell, Tyrese Halliburton were hurt in critical well, in Jimmy Butler's case for all of it. But for the other two players I mentioned for large parts of this series, in critical parts of the series. So we can't hold that against them, up against the Boston Celtics. But either way, they were doing so well in the regular season that, in my opinion, then they weren't tested enough. And now we get to the playoffs. And now, credit again where it's due. They've had two scenarios against the Indiana Pacers now in games 3 and game 4 where they had to execute late, and they did. And so that's better than nothing. I'm glad that that happened to this Boston Celtics team. I'm less concerned that it got to that point, and I'm more happy that they were forced to execute late and try to run plays. Well, not try, they did, and run plays against an actual NBA defense in a playoff environment. So I think that experience will serve them well going forward. But I mean, let's also be real. This is a team that they still haven't been tested against another NBA roster at full capacity. And at times, especially early in this Pacers series, at times when they were, it looked questionable at best. And to many, it looked like they were mostly fortunate to advance. So can Boston do something that's somewhat unique? And I'm talking within the season. Let's take away past years for now, because obviously Boston has paid their dues in terms of heartbreak. But for now, if I think this would be something of a complete anomaly if Boston were to beat the eventual winner of the West, and again, more likely than not, Dallas Mavericks. This would be something of an anomaly if Boston were to win without having been tested either in the regular season or in the playoffs. And I think that is something that will still come back to bite them. Now, you could argue the KD Warriors or that KD Warriors team, but they face more of an obstacle on their path to the finals, for example, than how I view at least this Boston team this year on their NBA finals path. And it was the nucleus of a team that had proven that they can execute late, and then you add Kevin Durant. So to me, that's talk about apples to apples. That's not a good apples to apples comparison because it's 2 completely different scenarios. The question that we had about that team for the Warriors was, could they stay healthy? It wasn't a question of talent, it wasn't even a question of who had the last shot because you knew you had 3 great options And even if the ball was forced out of the hand, you could have lived with KD or Thompson or Steph missing a shot. You could have lived with that. But still, off and this is off the top of my head from memory, still, they at least were pushed a little more, and they were facing more full now there were still injuries along the way in that playoff victory, in that playoff path as well. But the same concern either way wasn't there because of who that team was and the collection of players on that team. Contrast that to the number one thing that we are worried about with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, Larry Bird, Eastern Conference MVP or not, is can they and are they going to be able to execute late? And so that is the question, in my opinion, that remains. But that's all the time we have for right now. Tune in 4 PM to provide the spark, our afternoon show. My name's Gabriel. Check us out on CuriousSportsPulse.com and